1, 2, 3. Welcome to Preeminent Test Prep. Today is day 18 in our 90-day SAT prep series. So today I'll be taking you through half an hour of SAT math prep and then half an hour of SAT writing prep. So for today, we're going to start with the SAT math section. So I'll be taking you through problems 9 through 15 of SAT 2018 released test from the state of Maine, and then I'll be taking you through problems 9 through 15 of the math with calculator section from that same test. So as I go through this math section, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be giving you tips, tricks, advice, and setups that you can look for to save time on the SAT math section. You can be able to save time with not having to read things, being able to use tricks to get around showing a ton of work, and anything like that. So with those things, put them in your notebook, and I'll try to tell you what to put in your notebook, and everything else you can just put in your workbook to get more practice. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with question 9 here. All right, so the question 9, what I'm seeing immediately that jumps out to me is I see that I have a lot of variables, okay? I don't have a ton of numbers, but I have a lot of variables. So one thing that I know immediately when I see that is I'm just going to look at what my answer choices are really quick, and I see that they're what H equals. See, everything here is what H equals. Then I read my last part, and it just says which of the following correctly expresses storage cost in terms of the other variables. So I know I just have to rearrange to solve for H here. So I don't have to read any of this. Okay, so I just saved time there. So that's something you should put in your notes, is that if you see an equation given with a lot of variables, skip down to your answer choices and see if you just have to find what one variable equals, because then you can just rearrange your equation. Okay, and then always double check it by reading this last part of the question just to make sure that you're just asked for that. And then once you've done that, just go ahead and rearrange. So now we know that we just have to solve for H. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to go ahead and square both sides to get rid of our square root. So we're going to have q squared equals 2dk over h. We're going to multiply each side by h, multiply each side by h, divide each side by q squared, divide each side by q squared, and we see that h then is going to equal 2dk over q squared. I look at my answer choices, I see the only one with q squared in the denominator c, so I know my answer for 9 has to be answer choice C. So the big thing here was really just making sure that we recognized right away that we didn't have to read all of this, so we saved that time. We just saw that we have to solve for k, then we just used algebra to go ahead and solve for h. I misspoke, solve for h, not solve for k. So that's the big tip you should have in your notes for number 9. Number 10, in the equation above, c is a constant. If the equation has infinitely many solutions, what's the value of c? All right, well, if we have infinitely many solutions, that means whatever is on this side has to equal whatever is on this side. So I need x to equal x then. Well, I have 8x, so if I want to get to x, I have to minus 7x. I have a 2x here, so I want to know 2 times what, right? 2x times what is going to give me 7. Well, 2x times 3.5 is going to give me 7, but I already have a 1 here, so I have to take that 3.5, and I have to subtract a 1. So 3.5 minus 1, that's going to leave me with 2.5, which is equal to 5 over 2. So my answer there is going to be answer choice B for number 10. So as far as things you should put in your notes for this one, if we have an equation that has infinitely many solutions, then that means that they're identical equations, right? So we have an x here. Well, x has to equal x then. So 8x minus 7x is going to leave us with x. Therefore, we know that this 2x times c plus 1 is going to have to give us 7. We know that 2x times 3.5 gives us 7, but we have a plus 1 here. So we want to subtract 1 from 3.5, and we get 2.5. So really the big thing there is understanding that infinitely many solutions means we have to have equivalent equations. All right, question 11. In 1962, the population of a bird species was 2,000. The population k years after 1962 was 48. The k satisfies the equation above. Which of the following is the best interpretation of the number 61 in this context? Well, I know this 2,000 here is my bird population in 2000 for that species, and I know I'm losing 61 then for every k, right? K being the years after 1962, right? So that means that for every year after 1962, I'm losing 61 birds per year. So 61 birds per year are dying. So that's going to be answer choice D for number 11. The answer, or the average decrease in the population per year from 1962 to k years after 1962 is that right there, right? That 61 is how many birds are dying off per population year from 1962 for every year after that. Okay, it's not the population k years after 1962 because that's whatever this 2000 minus 61k would equal. It's not the value of k when the population was 48. That's incorrect as well. C, the difference between the population. No, We're not dealing with difference. Whenever we have a variable next to a number, we know that that number is really dealing with our slope here. In this case, that slope is going to be our decrease in population per year. So as far as tips you can put in your notes, anytime we have a number next to a variable in our equation and it's a subtraction like that, we're really looking at most likely a decrease in some sort of number, right? That's really our slope that we're dealing with there. All right, so right here we have the graph of the equations shown in the xy plane above, where y equals f of x, which the following functions could define f. Immediately when I see that I have all of these numbers and I see I have these zeros here, I'm going to go ahead and come up with what my zeros are and use those to find my answer. So I see that I have an x-intercept at 2, which means I have to have x minus 2. I see I have an x-intercept at negative 1, which means I have to have x plus 1 because I have to flip that sign. And then I have one at negative 3, which means I'll have to have x plus 3. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of anything that doesn't have all three of those. So I see A doesn't have all three of those, I'm going to get rid of that. I see B doesn't have all three of those, I'm going to get rid of that. Then I'm looking at my other answer choices. I see they have them. So the next thing that I'm going to do in order to know my right answer is I notice that I have increasing on my after 2, so basically increasing as I go to infinity with x, and I see I'm decreasing here. In order for that to happen, I have to have an odd power. Okay, so I have to have x raised to an odd power as my first term. So if I look at that, I see that answer choice D, I'm going to have an even power because I'm going to have a 2 times a 1 times a 1 power. So that's going to give me some x to the 4th power as my leading term, which means that it would look something like this, right? That's going up and up, or down and down. Okay, or down and down. So that can't be my answer. I need something that has an odd exponent, which is going to be answer choice C, because I have a 2 times a 2, and then I have this plus a 1 here, so it's going to give me some x raised to the 5th, right? So my answer there is going to have to be answer choice C. As far as things to put in your notes, understanding anything with an odd exponent is going to have one thing that goes up and one thing that goes down, so something like that or something like this, right? You're looking at things with odd exponents, you're not going to have them both going up in the same direction. If you have an even exponent for your first term, then it's going to look something like that, where it's going up in both directions or going down in both directions. So that's another thing that we can use. Another thing was using those x-intercepts to solve. That's another thing I talked about before, and that I would put in your notes if you don't have it there yet as well. All right, question 13. Which of the following could be the x-coordinate of a solution to the system of equations above? Okay, what jumps out to me immediately here? I'm asked to solve for an x-coordinate, and I see I have a y. I know what y equals, and I can place that in here, and then I can just solve for x by finding what it equals, because I have a constant here. So then I'm only dealing with one variable, and the variable I'm dealing with is what I have to solve for anyways, so that's what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to go ahead and plug this in for this y here. So my x plus 2 squared, that's going to give me x squared plus 4x plus 4, right? Because this 2 would get multiplied by that x. This x would get multiplied by our other 2 to give us plus 4x. And then we're going to have a 2 times itself, because x plus 2 squared can be rewritten as this, right? X plus 2. That's going to get us our plus 4. So that's our first part. Next thing we're going to have is a negative 2x plus 4 minus 3. Well, plus 4 and then minus 3, that's going to give me a plus 1. That's all that's going to be left, because that's 4 minus 3. So then I'm going to have a negative 2x, and then I'm going to have plus 1, and that's going to get squared. So negative 2x times negative 2x is going to give me a positive 4x squared. So I'm going to have plus 4x squared here. Now I have a negative 2x times 1, and then I'll have another negative 2x times 1, so that's going to give me minus 4x. Okay, so I know that's going to cancel with this 4x, so now I have no x term. And then I'll have a plus 1 times a plus 1, which will just give me a plus 1, and I'm just going to add that right here to give me that 5. So I see what I'll be left with is an x squared plus a 4x squared. That'll give me 5x squared, so I have 5x squared plus 5. That's going to equal 40. At this point, I go ahead and I subtract 5 from each side. Subtract 5 from each side. I'm going to have 35 equals 5x squared, so 5x squared equals 35. Divide each side by 5 to isolate x squared. 35 over 5 is 7. I square root each side now to get rid of this squared here. When I do that, I see I have the square root of 7 as my answer, which is going to be answer choice A. So big things that we're looking at here is just understanding that if we're asked to solve for a variable and we're given what one of them equals and we can plug it in, right, in order to get rid of our y and only have left that variable we have to solve for, that's going to be our quickest way to get to the right answer. So that's what I'm recommending right there. So you can put that in your notebook. I would recommend it. All right, question 14. The equation above can be used to model the population in thousands of a certain city T years after 2000. According to the model, the population is predicted to increase by 0.5% every n months. What is the value of n? Okay, well, n months, I know t is in years, so t is in years. So I know that if we're going to take a 0.5% increase, okay, a 0.5% is 0.005, okay, so a 0.5% increase is 0.005. So I need that raised to the first power. If I'm going to have that raised to the first power, I need t to equal 3. So I would need 3 years, which I know that 3 years is equal to 36 months, right? 3 years equals 36 months. Because there are 12 months in a year, times 3 years gives us 36 months. So my answer there has to be D. So the big thing that I'd recommend as far as this is understanding how these equations work. I talked about this in our first week of prep. Understanding that if we have a 0.5% increase, then we're dealing with this right here. And this is correct as far as a 0.5% increase. But in order for that to be true, we need to raise it to the first power, right? So the power of 1, so we have to have a 3/3 there. And then understanding that t is in years, so if we have 3 years, we just convert that 3 years to months, and we see we're going to have 36 months. All right, question 15. Which of the following is an equivalent form of the expression 2x minus 2 squared minus 2x minus 2? All right, first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to look at what I can use to get rid of wrong answer choices as quickly as I can. I see I have different numbers here, here, and possibly here and here as well for my last term. So I'm going to solve for what my last term equals first. So I'm going to have a -2 times a -2. Since this is squared, that's going to give me +4. Then I have a minus a -2 minus -2. It gives me +2. So I know my last term is going to have to be a 6, so I can get rid of b. And then I look down here. I see I'll have a -2 times a -2, which is a +4 for my last term. I can get rid of c as well. And I have a -3 times a -2, which gives me +6. So now I'm between a and d. Next thing I'm going to look at is what's different between them. Easiest thing that I see is a 2x squared here versus a 4x squared here, because that 2x gets multiplied by 2x, give me 4x squared. So now I'm going to go up here and come up with what my x squared term is going to be. Well, I'm going to have a 2x, and then that's going to get multiplied by 2x since this is squared. And that's going to give me 4x squared, so I know my answer then has to be D for 15. All right, so notice how I never worked with this middle term. I never worked with the middle term because it was quicker for me to get rid of wrong answer choices and then not even have to worry about that, because I didn't need to know the middle term to get to the right answer. I just had to know my last term and my first term. So understanding that you don't have to always solve for everything in the problem, and understanding you only have to solve for what's wrong with other answer choices, and then you can know the correct answer choice has to be correct, right? So that's something that I talk about a lot and that I would recommend putting in your notes or just adopting as a strategy as a whole. That's not even necessarily something that has to be in your notes, but it should be a strategy that you use to move faster. All right, so now we can switch over to the with calculator section. Keep in mind the with calculator section, its problems 9 through 15 are going to be easier because they're earlier on in the section as a whole. Okay, problems 9 through 15 in the math no calculator section are going to be some of the harder problems, especially 12 through 15. Those are usually going to be the hardest problems on the no calculator section. And I'll talk more about how that works into our strategy later on. But for now, we're going to go ahead and get started with 9 through 15 of the with calculator section. So we have question 9. We got total home runs for selected years from 1903 to 2013. So I see home runs is y-axis, year is x-axis. So the scatter plot above shows the total number of home runs hit in Major League Baseball in 10-year intervals for selected years. The line of best fit is also shown. Which of the following is closest to the difference between the actual number of home runs and the number predicted by the line of best fit in 2003? Okay, well, anytime that I'm asked for a specific year, I'm going to draw that line up. Now, I know I was asked for the difference between my actual number and my predicted number by the line of best fit. The line of best fit here predicted 4,500, and my actual number would appear to be about 5,250. So that difference there is going to be this 5,250 minus 4,500, which is about that 750. So that's going to be about 750. So I'm going to look at my answer choices. I see I have that as answer choice C. And I see that this is actually really close between 750 and 850. So if I see that, normally I wouldn't expect it to be that close because a lot of times they don't anticipate your eyesight having to be that good. But in this case, it looks like they do. So I'm going to go ahead and check and make sure. And I see that if anything, this would be slightly below half. So rounding that one to 750 would be the correct way to do it, right? It's definitely not going to be 500 because they would have to put that one right on the dot. But it is erring to the side of down, so we're going to err to the side of 750 versus 850 in this case. All right, so number 9 is going to be answer choice C. All right, question 10. Questions 10 to 12 refer to the following information. Let me just get 1 minute here. Okay, there we go. All right, the line graph above shows the average price of 1 metric ton of oranges in dollars for each of 7 months in 2014. Between which two consecutive months? Okay, consecutive means back to back. If you didn't know that, you should put that in your notes. So consecutive is going to mean back to back, right? For example, consecutive months would be February and March, or March and April, or April and May. All right, for which two consecutive months shown did the average price of 1 metric ton of oranges decrease the most? So the biggest decrease between two consecutive months, that's going to be where our slope is the most negative. And I see our most negative slope is going to be from June to July. So my answer there is going to be June to July. So answer choice C for number 10. As far as notes there, understand consecutive means back to back. If they were to say non-consecutive, that would mean that it cannot be back to back. It would have to be split up. So understand that and put that in your notes if you don't have that already. All right, question 11. Which of the following is closest to the median price in dollars of the 7 recorded prices of 1 metric ton of oranges? Okay, median. I talked about this before. Median means that we're going to take our minimum and our maximum, right? And if we were to arrange it from least to greatest, so least to greatest, we're just going to take off minimum, take off maximum, take off our next minimum, take off our next maximum until we get to our middle term. Now, if our middle term has 2, then we're going to find the average, right? So if we get down to, say, we had 3 and a 5, then we're going to have to average that. So we're going to have to take 3 plus 5, split it over 2, and our median then is going to be 4. Right? So that's how a median works on the SAT. All right, so let's go ahead and find our median here of this graph. All right, so we've got our median of the graph. Let's go ahead and take off our minimum right here, take off our maximum, take off our next minimum, take off our next maximum, take off our next maximum, take off our next minimum. We see that our median then is going to be at 808 oranges. So our answer there is going to be answer choice B. All right, question 12. And one thing that I would say that you could put in your notes as well is notice how much I annotate these graphs. I highly recommend drawing on the graphs on the SAT math section. You should really be making a lot of marking up on tables and graphs because it'll help you avoid making mistakes as far as just looking at this line instead of this line or something like that. So I highly recommend marking up your graphs. Question 12. In 2014, the average price of 1 metric ton of oranges decreased by 2.36% from January to February. Which of the following is closest to the price of 1 metric ton of oranges in January 2014? All right, well, what was the average price in February? We need to know that. We see that the average price in February is right around 770. All right, so we have 770. Now, we know that if the average price in February was 170, we know that that's equal to a 2.3% decrease times what it was in January. So J is going to be what the price was in January. We know that that times our 100% minus that 2.36%. Right, so we're going to have that much times our 1 minus our 0.236%, so 0.0236. That's going to give us our 770 in February. So now we just divide by this. So divide by that 1 minus that 0.0236, okay, and we divide this side by that as well. And that's going to give us our answer for how much they cost in January. 1 minus 0.0236. Okay, this will cancel out to 1, so we get rid of that, and now we have the cost in January. We plug that into our calculator real quick, so I'll do that. 770 divided by 1 minus 0.0236, and we're going to get 788, right? 788.6. which is just about 790. So our answer for 12 is going to be answer choice C. Okay. So as far as what you need to understand for this one is how to work with percentages. Okay. So if you have a decrease of 2.36%, then that's going to mean that your percent decrease written in decimal form is going to be 0.0236. Okay. If it were 20%, it'd be 0.2. But if it's 2%, it's going to be 0.02. So that's what you need to understand for 12. All right, question 13. All right, we have a table. So the table above shows the distributions of single-story and two-story houses in a neighborhood classified according to roof type. If one of the houses is selected at random, okay, we need to always pay attention to if we're selecting at random or not. In this case, we are. What is the probability that it will be a single-story house with a slate roof? Okay, we're going to find single-story house, which is right here, find slate roof, and we see that that's a 4. Now it's any house at random, so that 4 is going to be out of our total, okay? We aren't selecting from a criteria, we're selecting from our total. So that's going to be 4 over 48, which is going to be answer choice A for 13. So answer choice A is going to be 13. So as far as things that you should have in your notes, I talked about this before. Anytime that we have a comparison like this, where we have a table with different things as far as rows and tables, we really want to make sure that we're circling what we want to find our probability for and then what's it out of. So in some cases, it'll be out of only the ones with slate roofs, in which case it'd be 4 out of 14, or only those that are single story, in which case it'd be out of 15. So paying attention to what we're out of, so what our total is, whether that be here, or here, or here, and then paying attention to what our criteria is, because sometimes it'll have to be this over this. So sometimes it'll be how many are single story out of our total, or how many are slate out of our total. So really understanding how to interpret this graph is really important. And you'll get more practice with that as we go on. All right, question 14. What is the solution? What is the solution, or for the solution of the system of equations above, what is the value of x? All right, well, if you have to solve for x, what I'm going to look to do anytime I have a stacked equations here and I'm asked to solve for a variable is get rid of one by adding and subtracting. In this case, I see by adding I can get rid of y because I'll have negative y plus y, so that's going to be 0y. So I will have 4x equals negative 4, and then plus 4, that's going to give me 0. Therefore, x has to equal 0, because if I divide each side by 4, 0 over 4 is still 0, right? So answer there has to be answer choice C. So as far as things to put in your notes, I talked about this a lot in that second week of this prep course. I talked about how we can add and subtract to get rid of variables and then solve for the one that we need. So that's really what this one's looking for you to do. Anytime I see a stacked up equation like this, I'm always looking for that. Sometimes we'll have to multiply or divide one equation to do it, but either way, I'm looking to get rid of something by doing that. So anytime they're stacked like that, that's what I look for. So that should go in your notes if you don't have it there yet. All right, question 15. The load capacity of a certain washing machine is 12 pounds. What is the approximate load capacity of the same washing machine in kilograms? So here we're just converting pounds to kilograms. Okay, so we're going to take that 12 pounds and we're going to multiply by how many kilograms we have per pound. We see we have 1 kilogram per 2.2 pounds, right? Keep in mind I'm rounding here because I clearly see I don't have to be that exact, right? So that's another thing you can do, so you don't have to plug in a ton of decimals in your calculator. Okay, another thing that I'd recommend putting in your notes is look at how I'm canceling units. Okay. That's how I prevent making a mistake where I multiply by a flipped fraction or something like that, is I make sure I'm canceling units to end in kilograms, because that's what I'm asked for my answer in kilograms. So that's one thing I definitely recommend. So here I see I'm going to have to do 12 divided by 2.2. I'll plug that into my calculator real quick. 12 over 2.2. And I see that gives me about 5.4. So my answer there is going to be answer choice B for 15. So the big thing there is understanding that we want to cancel our units, right? I really, really recommend that, and I stress that for especially with word problems. If you struggle with word problems, that's going to be really your best friend, is canceling those units out. That's something I learned from physics, and that's something I think is very, very applicable to the SAT math section. So that takes us through our math section for today. So we'll go ahead and switch over to the SAT writing section now, and today we'll probably end up finishing up around 10 or 15 minutes early as well. Okay, let's get started with the writing section for today. So we're going to spend half an hour on the writing section today. We'll be in SAT Practice Test 3, doing problems 1 through 22. So we're going to do 2 passages in about 25 to 30 minutes, maybe even a little bit shorter than that. But really, I'll be going in a slowed down version, not too fast, just to kind of give you tips and tricks and insights as to things you can put in your notebook, how to approach question types, what I look for, and certain tricks you can do to recognize how to get rid of wrong answer choices and find the correct answer very, very quickly. So really just a lot of teaching through these passages, not much working on pacing yet. We'll do pacing in later weeks, but right now it's just making sure that you're able to get to the answer choice and find the correct answer choice, and then we'll worry about speed a little bit more later. But you'll find tips and tricks that'll help you go faster as we go through this as well. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, questions 1 through 11 are on the following passage. Shed some light on the workplace. Studies have shown that employees are happier, healthier, and more productive when they work in an environment. Okay, so I know that this is a parallelism question because I have a list of basically 3 verbs here. Or not 3 verbs, I have 3 adjectives, right? I have happier, healthier, and more productive, okay? I wouldn't say happier, healthy, because then I'm losing that parallelism from this IER, right? I want to maintain that, so I can get rid of B. And then I look at my other options, they all include healthier, right? So then I have to move on. I'm not going to say and they are, because then I'm repeating this employees here. I already said employees, so I don't have to say they are as well, because that would be redundant and repetitive, so I can get rid of that. And then I have a comma being more. I would need an and after that, healthier, so I can get rid of D as well, and I see my correct answer choice will be A, right? We're going to say happier, healthier, and more productive, right? We can't say productive year because that's not a word, so we have to say and more productive there, so we're not able to maintain that parallelism between all three, but this is the answer that's as close as we can get while still being grammatically correct. So anytime that you see endings are the same, that's an indicator that it's going to be parallelism. Anytime you see a list of 3 adjectives or 3 verbs, then that's also an indicator that it's going to be a parallelism question. All right, when they work in an environment in which temperatures are carefully controlled. So now I'm asked which choice provides the most appropriate introduction to the passage. Well, considering that that was my first sentence, I have to read more on before I can answer to. So that's what I'm going to do. New buildings may be designed with these studies in mind, but many older buildings were not, resulting in spaces that often depend primarily on artificial lighting. Okay, so that's going to be lighting that isn't real. While employers may balk at the expense of reconfiguring such buildings to increase the amount of natural light, the investment has been shown to be well worth it in the long run for both employees and employers. Okay, so we're really talking about natural light and not temperatures, so I can go ahead and get rid of A there. I see B, that affords them adequate amounts of natural light. That's what we're talking about here, so B will be our correct answer. C, that is thoroughly sealed to prevent energy loss. No. And then D, in which they feel comfortable asking managers for special accommodations. We don't talk about that either. Okay, so we know our answer for 2 there is going to be answer choice B. All right, so as far as things we can put in our notes for number 2, that one's really just if you're asked for what most appropriately introduces the rest of the paragraph or the rest of the passage, make sure you read on before you answer that. All right, for one thing, lack of exposure to natural light has a significant impact on employees' health. A study conducted in 2013 by Northwestern University in Chicago showed that inadequate natural light could result in eye strain, headaches, and fatigue, as well as interference with the body's circadian rhythms. So at this point, the writer is considering adding the following sentence. Workers in offices with windows sleep an average of 46 minutes more per night than workers in offices without windows. And then I need to read on in order to see whether I should add that sentence. I need to know what comes after it. Okay, so we just finished talking about circadian rhythms. Okay, now I see I'm starting with circadian rhythms again, which are controlled by the body's biological clocks. Okay, so if I was to include this, then I'm disrupting my talk about circadian rhythms, right? I want to keep talking about circadian rhythms, so I don't want to interrupt that with this fact that people with offices and windows sleep 46 minutes or more. So I would be interrupting my discussion of circadian rhythms there, which means my answer has to be C. We're not going to add it because it interrupts that discussion. All right, which are controlled by the body's biological clock. Well, we know we only have one body here, so it's going to have to be bodies with a Y and an apostrophe S, because it is the body's biological clock. The body does own that biological clock, right, or biological clocks. So we can go ahead and get rid of A, and we can get rid of B because they have the wrong bodies. Okay, now we look at C. Clocks doesn't own anything, so there can't be an apostrophe there. Or I'm sorry, D, there can't be an apostrophe there. So our answer for 4 is going to have to be answer choice C. So as far as things that we could take from number 4, really just understanding what we do with possessives, right? Clocks doesn't own anything, so it can't have that apostrophe, so we can get rid of that. And then we also have to understand which bodies we need. In this case, there's one body, and it owns these biological clocks, so that's going to be a Y instead of an IE, because IE would be multiple bodies. All right, so we have cycles of sleep and wakefulness, other bodily functions. Disruptions of circadian rhythms have been linked to sleep disorders, diabetes, depression, and bipolar disorder. Like any other health problems, these ailments can increase employee absenteeism, which in turn is costly for employers. Okay, so as far as this one's really just understanding what this is referring to. So maintaining subject-verb agreement, right? Is our verb. What is our subject? Well, we see that if we're going to read, we see, like any other health problems, these ailments can increase employee absenteeism, which is costly for employers, right? This is singular and is singular. So we're maintaining our number agreement between our subject and our verb. So our answer there is going to be answer choice A, is, because we have to maintain that singular verb tense with our singular subject, employee absenteeism. All right, employees who feel less than 100% and are sleep deprived are less prone to work at their maximal productivity. One company in California gained a huge boost in its employees' morale. Okay, I already know I'm going to have to switch this because we should be talking about productivity here. So 6 says, which choice best supports the statement made in the previous sentence? And that's going to be answer choice B, saw a 5% increase in productivity. If we just talked about something with productivity, then we want to support that sentence or that claim that we just made, them being less prone to work at maximum productivity. We want to support that claim. We don't want introduce evidence that supports a different claim there. So we would want to use evidence that supports that they're not working at maximum productivity, which would be that when a company in California moved from artificially lit distribution to one with natural illumination, they saw a 5% increase in productivity. That's showing how there's an increase in productivity with more natural light. So that's supporting our previous sentence. So that's going to be our answer there, right? We don't talk about them saving a great deal on operational costs or investing large amounts of time and capital. All right, so now we want to transition from our previous paragraph to this one. So we want to keep that in mind. Anytime that we start a new paragraph, we want to make sure that we are transitioning from our old paragraph. So it's transition from our old paragraph. All right, so in context, which choice best combines the underlined sentences? We have artificial light sources are also costly aside from lowering worker productivity. They typically constitute anywhere from 25 to 50% of a building's energy use. All right, well, the big thing that we're looking to transition from before was that lowering of worker productivity. We talked about how there's lower worker productivity in areas with less natural light. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're really starting with that idea so we can transition over. I see that B says the cost of artificial light sources. That's not a good transition. I see C we have typically constituting 25 to 50% of a building's energy use. That isn't a good transition. D, artificial lights, which lower worker productivity and are costly. Well, what's wrong with this one is that we're saying that they lower worker productivity and are costly. Well, lowering worker productivity is costly on its own, so we don't want to use that one either. All right, so we're left with A, and if we read on, we see why A is correct in addition. It transitions, that's really the most important part here. And then it says artificial light sources are also costly, typically constituting anywhere from 25 to 50% of a building's energy use. So the big thing here is making sure we're transitioning from that previous paragraph to this paragraph. If we look at answer choice D, starting with artificial lights, that's a bad transition, right? We want to transition from what we were just talking about, which is the lowering of worker productivity. So that's what we want to start with there. So that's why 7 is going to be correct. So anytime that we have the first word of a new paragraph, we want to make sure we have a transition from our old paragraph. So that's something you should put in your notes. So when a plant in Seattle, Washington was redesigned for more natural light, the company was able to enjoy annual electricity reductions of $500,000 each year. Each year needs to be removed. And I don't even have to look at my answer choices. I know that's going to be correct because we said annual here. And this is something that, in my opinion, shows up a decent amount on SAT practice tests and on the SAT, is something like this where it's redundant, where they'll say annual and then they'll also have each year. You only have to have one or the other. You cannot have both because annual means each year. So if we were to say each year again, then we're being repetitive and redundant, and we don't want to do that. All right, so answer there is going to be D. All right, question 9. Among the possibilities to reconfigure a building's lighting is the installation of full pane windows to allow the greatest degree of sunlight to reach office interiors. Okay, I have one word underlined at the beginning of a sentence followed by a comma, so I know I'm looking at a transition word from that previous sentence to my new sentence. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read what my new sentence is first, and I'll answer any questions within that sentence as well, then go back and find which word connects those sentences. So we have businesses can install light tubes, and then this is going to be which are pipes. Right? If we're going to use a comma to describe the light tubes afterwards, we're going to have to say which. We wouldn't say these, right? Because in this case, we're describing what the light tubes are, and they are which are pipes placed in workplace roofs. So we are going to use which there, right? Anytime that we have a comma, and then we're going to explain what something is, we will use which, or if it was a time, we would use when, right? So our answer there is going to be C, which are pipes placed in workplace roofs to capture and funnel sunlight down to a building's interior. Okay, well, what we're talking about here is an alternative. So our answer for 9 is going to be C. And I'll go ahead and explain why here. So what we're providing is an alternative to the installation of full pane windows. We say full pane windows would allow the greatest degree of sunlight to reach office interiors, but as an alternate to that, alternatively, businesses could install light tubes, right, which are these pipes placed in workplace roofs to capture and funnel sunlight down to a building's interior. So we're providing an alternate option. So our answer there is going to be answer choice C. All right, glass walls and dividers can also be used to replace solid walls as a means. Okay, this is one word underlined in the middle of a sentence. Anytime I have one word underlined in the middle of a sentence, I'm really looking at two things. I'm looking at it to either be an idiom question, right? And in an idiom, if you remember, that's really just coming up with what would be a natural way to say it, right? What we would commonly say. That usually deals with prepositions or gerunds, things like that. So if there's one word underlined in the middle of a sentence and it's something like through, of, for, anything like that, then it's likely an idiom question. In this case, it is an idiom question. And another thing that you could look for is if it's a word that is an adjective that's underlined in the middle of a sentence or a verb underlined in the middle of a sentence, then you're usually looking at something to match the tone of the rest of the passage. But in this case, we have an idiom question, right? Because we have through here. Okay, so through is going to be incorrect because what we would naturally say is we would say as a means of distributing natural light more freely. So our answer there is going to be B, and that right there is an idiom question. All right, that's going to take us through that passage. Another thing to note, usually the passages on the SAT writing section are questions 1 through 11 for each passage. So if you know that, then after you answer question 11, don't read the rest of this because you're just wasting time because there's no more questions on it. So. All right, questions 12 through 22 are based on the following passage, transforming the American West through food and hospitality. Just as travelers taking road trips today may need to take a break for food at a rest area along the highway, settlers traveling the American West by train in the mid-1800s often find themselves. Okay, we have one word underlined in the middle of a sentence. In this case, it's not any sort of preposition or anything like that, so it is not going to be an idiom question. As far as whether or not it's a tone question, it's not going to be a tone question either because we're not dealing with an adjective or a verb. But what we are dealing with here is something where we have to match our subject's number. We have to match our subject's number. Okay, subject's number. So here we're looking to match our subject's number. That's another thing that you can see is if you have one word underlined in the middle of a sentence, it can be something where you have to match a verb to a subject's number or a subject to a verb's number or a subject to another subject's number. So it can also be a number question if it's one word underlined in the middle of a sentence. In this case, that's what it is. So this themselves is referring to our settlers here. So we would not say him or herself because settlers is plural, so we need to maintain plural, so we're not going to say oneself. And we wouldn't say their selves because the correct way to say it is themselves, right? That's the grammatically correct way. We would refer to settlers as themselves. Okay, so we have themselves in need of refreshment. However, food available on rail lines was of terrible quality. Okay, now I'm asked for which choice most logically introduces the sentence. Well, if I'm going to have an introductory modifier, before I even read this, I want to know what I'm modifying and what it's going to say. So I'm going to go ahead and read that first. That way I know really what I'm looking at. Fred Harvey, an English-born entrepreneur. Okay. And then we have he decided to open his own restaurant. So I'll go ahead and answer this one first. This right here, anytime that I have underline going through a period or any sort of punctuation into another word at the beginning of a sentence, I'm usually looking to combine those sentences. In this case, that is obviously what I'm doing. So we have Fred Harvey, an English-born entrepreneur, decided, right? We would say Fred Harvey, an English-born entrepreneur, decided, right? And here's the thing, we can't say he because we already have Fred Harvey, so that would be repetitive. Okay, another problem with this is there's a semicolon here. We wouldn't want to use that. Then right here we have a colon. If we use that colon, we can't have decided to open his own restaurant because that wouldn't work grammatically. As far as no change, we would just have Fred Harvey, an English-born entrepreneur, which isn't a full sentence, so we can't do that either. Okay, our answer is going to be D. Another thing you can use to know that it's D is this an English-born entrepreneur? That's a non-essential phrase or clause. So we want to offset that with commas. We have a comma here, so we have to have a comma after entrepreneur as well, and our only answer choice with that is D. So our answer there is going to be D. Right, like I said, we get rid of the he because we already said Fred Harvey. So we don't have to say he anymore. That would be redundant. All right, beginning in the 1870s, he opened dozens of restaurants and rail stations and dining cars. These Harvey houses, which constituted the first restaurant chain in the United States, this is going to be were unique for there. Okay, how did I get there so quickly? Well, this right here, from which constituted the first restaurant chain in the United States, that is a non-essential phrase or clause, so I ignore it, and I find that my subject then is going to be these Harvey houses, which is plural, so I have to match my verb to be a plural verb. I know my plural verb is going to be were because we would say they were, and we know that they is plural, right? We would say he was, right? So was is going to be singular, were is going to be plural. So I know that were is going to be my plural answer, and they were unique for it's a singular, but we need plural because we're talking about these Harvey houses, which is plural. So I have to change that to there to be plural. So this is a question where I'm asked to match subject and verb agreement, and I do that by making it were unique for there. Okay, so my answer there is going to be answer choice B for 15. All right, the menu was modeled after those of fine restaurants, so the food was leagues beyond the. Okay, sinister isn't going to be a word that we use to describe the food. Okay, we're not going to take sinister and use it to describe food. But what we would use to describe food are words such as abysmal, okay? You might think icky would be used to describe food, and yes, but the problem is that the tone of icky doesn't fit our passage, okay? Icky is a very casual and kind of slang word, and we want to avoid casual and slang words. Avoid slang and casual words on SAT writing section, and I would put that in your notes. Okay, we don't want to use slang or casual words on the SAT writing section. We want to be academic. Okay, so that's why we're not going to use icky, and then the problem with sinister and surly is that they're not used, those are words that aren't used to describe food, so we're not going to use them to describe food here. All right, we're accustomed to receiving in transit. His restaurants were immediately successful, but Harvey was not content to follow traditional business practices. The writer's considering deleting this sentence. Should the writer make this change? Well, as far as what I can tell, right, we want to make sure that it's introducing what follows, okay? It didn't do a fantastic job of transitioning, but that's not what we're questioning on here, okay? Because the thing is, if we have this here, it's possible that they would test us on a transition, but in this case, considering they're asking us whether or not we should delete it, it's really not asking us about transition, because if we're asked whether or not we should delete it, then it's really kind of, it's 90% of the time, in my opinion, going to be really just telling us, is it properly introducing what's to come? Okay, if it's an addition question, then a lot of times it can be a mixture of transitions. Okay, if it's asking you whether a sentence should be added, a lot of times it's because it's adding a transition from the previous paragraph. But as far as when it's should you delete a sentence, a lot of times it's because it won't properly introduce what's to follow. So that's what I'm really looking for here. So we have, although women did not traditionally work in restaurants in the 19th century, Harvey decided to try employing women as waitstaff. In 1883, he placed an advertisement seeking educated, well-mannered, articulate young women between the ages of 18 and 30. All right, well, this is telling me that he's not following conventional business practices because he's hiring people that weren't normally hired as waitstaff. So that is a good setup into what's to follow in this paragraph. So I am going to want to keep this sentence. So keep in mind, another thing for the SAT writing section is understanding whether or not you're asked to add or delete a sentence. Here I'm asked whether or not I should delete it. So the answer is no, I don't want to delete it because it's providing a logical introduction to the paragraph. Okay, it's not providing a specific example in support of arguments made elsewhere in the passage, but it is providing a logical introduction into this paragraph here. So that's another big thing with the SAT writing section is understanding whether you're asked to add or delete something, okay? Because if you mix those up and then you answer yes or no, then you're going to lose points just because you mixed up this word right here. So pay close attention to whether you're asked to add or delete a sentence. All right. Response to the advertisement was overwhelming, even tremendous. I know I have to get rid of at least one of these between overwhelming and tremendous because they mean two similar of things, and I only want to use one because otherwise I'm being redundant and repetitive. So I look at my options. I see C has both of them, so C is incorrect. I see D has both of them, so D is incorrect. I see that A has both of them, so A is incorrect, but B has only one, so B is going to be my correct answer there because we avoid repetition and redundancy. All right, so Harvey soon replaced the male servers at his restaurants with women. Those who were hired as Harvey girls joined an elite group of workers who were expected to complete a 30-day training program and follow a strict code of rules for conduct and curfews. In the workplace, the women donned identical black and white uniforms and carried out their duties with precision. Not only were such regulations meant to ensure the efficiency of the business and the safety of the workers, but, okay, I see I have a comma here, and then I have a but. Okay, so that's going to indicate to me that I'm starting a new independent clause, which means I need to have a subject. So I need to have but they also help because they is going to be my subject there, and none of my other options have a subject, but I have to have a subject to complete this independent clause over here. So we need to have but they also helped to raise people's generally low opinion of the restaurant industry. So I need my subject they there in order to complete that independent clause. So that's another thing that you can look for on the SAT writing section is if you have a comma and a fanboy or a semicolon, you have to make sure that what comes after it is going to be an independent clause. Otherwise, it's not going to be grammatically correct. So right there, I was looking for a subject to complete my independent clause. In return for the server's work, the position paid quite well for the time, $17.50 a month, plus tips, meals, room and board, laundry service, and travel expenses. Okay, which choice most logically follows the previous sentence? So we're looking for something that's either illustrating this previous sentence or wrapping up our paragraph as a whole here. So we have A, the growth of the Harvey business coincided with the expansion of the Santa Fe Railway, which served large sections of the American West. No, we're talking about the Harvey girls here. We don't want to talk about any railways. B, Harvey would end up opening up dozens of restaurants and dining careers plus 15 hotels over his lucrative career? No. Why not? Well, because in this case, we're talking about the Harvey girls, not Harvey himself at this point. C, these benefits enabled the Harvey girls to save money and build new and exciting lives for themselves in the so-called Wild West. Yes, once again, we're talking about the Harvey girls and not Harvey himself. That's what we're really looking for there. D, the compensation was considered excellent. That's repetition because we already said that up here. We said it paid quite well for the time. So that would be redundant to say answer choice D. For as long as Harvey houses served rail travelers throughout the mid-20th century, working there as a steady and lucrative position for women. Living independently and demonstrating an intense work ethic, this needs to be a comma, and then we have Harvey girls right after that, right? So we're modifying that Harvey girls using an introductory modifying clause, so we need this comma after that. And you don't have to know the difference between clauses and phrases on the SAT. So if you hear me say a phrase or a clause, for all I know, I could be wrong. I'm not 100% sure. I do my best. But in reality, it just doesn't matter because we don't need to know the difference between a clause and a phrase for the SAT. All we need to know is that this is an introductory modifying phrase or clause, and we need to have a comma after it since it's modifying the Harvey girls. So I look at my answer choices, and I see I have answer choice D for question 21. All right, moving on, we got question 22. That's our last question. Became known as a transformative force in the American West. Should the writer revise the underlined portion to read inspiring books, documentaries, and a musical? Well, that's answer there is going to be yes and why. Okay, we have to answer with why. Well, the answer is going to be because it's illustrating, right? It's illustrating or proving how transformative they were. How transformative they were. So I'll show you how transformative they were. And I probably should have just circled an answer choice because my handwriting is really bad. And I'll go ahead and do that right now. All right, so if we look at our answer choices, yes, because it provides examples of the Harvey girls' influence, right? That's going to be our answer there. So we have to add it because we just talked about how the Harvey girls became a transformative force. And now we're illustrating that by showing that there's movies and books written about them and documentaries. So that's really showing how transformative of a force they were. We wouldn't say because it serves as a transitional point in the paragraph because it doesn't. D, no, we already determined that it should. So anytime that we go ahead and decide yes, then we're not going to look at no because then we're just wasting our time. Because most of the time, if you decide yes or no on one of these, you're going to be right, and it's just going to be a matter of determining why. So we're not even going to bother time explaining no. Yeah, we're not going to bother with that. All right. So that takes us through our SAT writing section for today. There will be a donation link in the description, so if my videos help you, I'd really appreciate the support. When the donation link is up and running, it will be linked in the description. Any private SAT tutoring I'm doing will be linked in the description. Any college admissions consulting I'm doing will be linked in the description. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and thank you for watching, and have a good day.